other place in the world.
When stakes are so high, we will keep fighting.
You were born for this moment.
I'm ready to win.
Have you heard? Your road to the Grammy
starts right here, and it's coming up this week on CBS Mornings.
Favorite morning show.
That's right.
I know when I wake up on Sunday mornings and I step into this studio, I'm always looking at where the story goes next.
The failure to secure the border has been so significant, so catastrophic, so egregious, that Congress must now use its power to provide accountability.
We are fully cooperating with this investigation. Since before I was sworn into office, I have endured relentless threats to my physical safety and life.
Yes. Hello, I'm Robert Costa in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. House Republicans are pushing forward with their effort to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. A House committee is now meeting to advance articles of impeachment against him. Republican lawmakers accuse Mayorkas of not complying with the law and breaching public trust over immigration and border policy. Democrats, meanwhile, have criticized that effort, calling it unconstitutional. CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian joins us now. Nicole, thank you for being here. What's the latest? Is this moving out of committee to the floor pretty quickly or not?
Well, the expectation is that this will advance and eventually will move to a full vote on the House floor, potentially as soon as next week. But this has really been a marathon proceeding as they try to mark up these articles of impeachment. And, you know, a lot of this stems from what Republicans believe is a dereliction of duty on the part of Secretary Mayorkas to enforce the laws at the U.S.-Mexico border. And they point to some of these record migrant crossings that we have seen most recently just in December, topping or around 10,000 migrant crossings, which, again, is extremely high. So even though those numbers have started to come down, there is a sense among Republicans that the secretary just simply has not done enough. And despite calls for his resignation and to step down, as you heard the chairman say, he feels that this is the only step to move forward. Democrats, on the other hand, are dismissing this as a sham. They say that this is simply about policy differences and it simply does not rise to that level of high crimes and misdemeanors. I spoke to two members of the panel earlier today to get their take on the proceedings. Take a listen.
Tell us what you're seeing and why you do think the secretary's impeachment is warranted.
It is very clear that whatever DHS is doing, they need to do something different. All you have to do is look at December. And so whether that's impeachment, whether that's resigning, whether that's putting somebody else in there, whatever it is, whatever the administration is currently doing is not working.
The bigger implication here is that we're not focused on fixing the problems that this country has. We have a border challenge. We have a refugee challenge. We have 2 wars, possibly 3 wars coming up. And we're debating an impeachment of a cabinet secretary.
So again, obviously, both lawmakers on different sides of the issue here, but would point out, of course, the first lawmaker that we talked to, Congressman Tony Gonzalez, really his district is at the epicenter of all of this. Eagle Pass, Texas, you know, this is a place where really that has been on the front lines of this border crisis. And so that's why you heard Congressman Gonzalez there say that he feels that there's no other option but to move forward with impeachment, whereas you heard from California Congressman Correa there who believes, look, let's at least try to work through this, through policy, through legislation. Let's give this border deal a chance. As you know, we're still waiting on legislative text in the Senate. So that is something that could potentially move the ball forward, even though House Republicans, particularly the Speaker, continue to pour cold water on that potential package.
On another front, the Department of Justice is investigating Representative Cori Bush of Missouri, a Democrat. What's the latest on that investigation and her response?
Yeah, well, this really kind of came as a surprise to many, particularly because this grand jury subpoena was read on the House floor, referenced on the House floor just yesterday. But the Congresswoman did acknowledge that she is under investigation by the Department of Justice. Take a listen to what she told reporters this afternoon.
In recent months, right-wing organizations have lodged baseless complaints against me, peddling notions that I have misused campaign funds to pay for personal security services. That simply is not true. I have complied with all applicable laws and House rules and will continue to prioritize the rules that govern us as federal elected officials.
So again, this investigation by the Department of Justice is looking into whether the Congresswoman may have misused funds, campaign funds, potentially for security purposes. But as you heard, the Congresswoman there pushing back against that notion and really trying to make the argument that she has faced a number of threats throughout her tenure, so much so that she does require additional security. But she says that she is cooperating with this investigation, that she has used her funds in the purview of what she is allowed to do. And so, again, we will see how this investigation plays out. It is worth noting that the Office of Congressional Ethics did look into this some time ago, but ultimately closed its case. Bob.
Nicole Killian, thank you for your reporting. We appreciate it.
You bet.
Texas and the Biden administration are clashing, as you know, just from our conversation there about the southern border. But Texas Governor Greg Abbott now says he'll add more razor wire, despite the Supreme Court ruling the federal government can remove it. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us now. You've been tracking all of this. Help us understand at a bigger picture level the battle between Governor Abbott and the federal government over razor wire, over how the fence is going to actually look.
Yeah, Bob, this is a pretty remarkable clash between Texas Governor Greg Abbott and the Biden administration at the U.S.-Mexico border. The Texas National Guard right now, Bob, is blocking federal Border Patrol agents from entering a public park in Eagle Pass, the town that Nicole mentioned, and from processing migrants there. And that has remained the status quo for about 3 weeks now. Border Patrol has been asking the Texas government to say that it will allow them back into the park because they need to process migrants, patrol the border, and they're saying that this interferes with federal immigration enforcement. Again, that is a federal prerogative. But Texas is saying that they need to fortify this park with razor wire, with other barriers to impede the passage of migrants and to deter illegal crossings. The Department of Homeland Security has now referred this matter to the Justice Department, so this could quickly turn into the latest legal lawsuit that the Biden administration files against Texas over the issue of immigration.
As the court waits or maybe continues to deliberate over all of this, what happens to the people who are crossing the border?
Well, the number of people crossing the border has actually plummeted since December. Last month, we saw more than 300,000 migrants being processed by Customs and Border Protection, an all-time high. But illegal crossings have since plummeted. U.S. officials, Bob, attribute that to increased Mexican enforcement following a meeting in Mexico City after Christmas that Mayorkas attended with the Mexican government there, and also a traditional period after the holidays in which migration slows after the holiday period in December and after New Year's. And so right now the numbers have dropped, but officials there in Texas say that they are concerned that illegal crossings will spike again at some point and that they need to do that to prevent this from turning into another crisis.
Razor wire. It has a visceral feel to the word. I mean, it evokes violence and it evokes skin against razor wire. What is it? What does it look like? You've been on the border. You've observed it up close. What does it mean for people who might graze it or even plunge into it? How is it playing out in real time? I mean, it's one thing to hear about razor wire being put up, but what does it mean? You've been on the ground.
That's right. I came back from Texas this morning. That park in Eagle Pass objectively looks like a battlefield. You have shipping containers trying to repel migrants from entering the Rio Grande. You have layers and layers of concertina wire and also razor wire set up there to repel migrants. And then you have National Guard soldiers deployed by Governor Abbott with rifles standing guard and telling migrants crossing into the U.S. illegally, you should be going to an official crossing, not doing this. Many migrants heed that warning and return to Mexico, so it is having some deterrent effect for some migrants, but other migrants are still finding a way into the U.S. despite that razor wire, often cutting themselves in the process. crawling underneath. So it is a very visceral scene, as you noted, and it really underscores the humanitarian implications of this crisis.
Are there any legal groups down there working with migrants?
There are some, but again, this area right now is completely sealed off, not only to the federal government, but to these lawyers and human rights groups.
We keep hearing about Eagle Pass.
Yes.
Why is Eagle Pass such a focal point for all of this?
Well, last year, it was the second busiest border sector in terms of illegal crossings, just behind the Tucson sector in Arizona, and it has been a hotspot for illegal immigration over the past 2 years.
So it's the hotspot in Texas?
It is, yes.
What makes it the hotspot, geographically, for other reasons?
The water levels in the Rio Grande there are much more shallow, less deeper than other parts, and so it's easier for migrants to get there. And there are very sophisticated smuggling networks, coyotes, on the other side in Piedras Negras, Mexico, that really facilitate the entry of migrants into the U.S. in that area.
This issue is not going away. No. It's in front and center of American politics and policy. You're on top of everything. Camila Montoya Galvez, thank you very much.
Thanks, Bob.
President Biden says he's made a decision on how to respond to the Iranian-backed attack that killed 3 U.S. service members. We'll discuss that with a Pentagon official after the break. You're streaming America Decides.
Well, let me start with this.
This really happened.
Have you told the government?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response? You want me to just
What's
keep
wrong
going?
with that argument?
What have you learned?
Do you know why?
Why? Why?
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America. We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good? Mm-hmm. Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
If we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
He was there when the war in Ukraine started.
Extreme history. It's a big moment.
The extraordinary story behind Sean Penn's new Paramount Plus documentary, Superpower, when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
It can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7. That is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable.
The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
Human remains found this week.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
How can we become our best selves? That may be more about character than talent.
The ultimate mark of your potential is how far you've climbed, not how high you've gone.
Realizing your true potential with Adam Grant as we go person to person.
Welcome back to America Decides. A U.S. official says additional air defenses are being sent to the base in Jordan, where 3 U.S. service members were killed in a drone strike. Tower 22, the site of the attack, did not have the same air defense capabilities as other bases in the region because it hadn't yet been the target of a previous assault. and we're still waiting to hear what the official U.S. response will be to all of this. Here's what President Biden had to say earlier today.
Yes.
Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh joins us now. Sabrina, thank you for being with us. Let's begin with the president. He says a decision has been made about how the U.S. will respond to this attack. What kind of response should we expect to see?
Thanks, Bob, for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Look, I'm not going to forecast what our response is going to be. What I can tell you is that, and what the president said and what the secretary has said, is that we are going to respond, but it's going to be at a time and place of our choosing. I don't want to get ahead of any military action that we're going to take. Of course, it wouldn't make sense to forecast our punches here. But what I can tell you is that there will be a response because we are going to hold those people accountable that did inflict injuries onto over 40 of our service members, and of course, tragically resulted in the death of 3 of our service members as well.
Sabrina, when was the Pentagon made aware the president had made a decision?
We're in constant communication with the White House, with the president. The secretary has been in regular meetings with the president at the White House, and of course has been in touch on a very consistent basis with the National Security Council. So again, I'm not going to give you a timeline here of when decisions were made, but I can tell you that the secretary and the president have been in lockstep the entire way.
For some Americans who might not be following every single detail of this, how should they understand the complexities of who could be targeted in this expected response? Is it a nation, a group, a certain person? How does the U.S. see the adversary in this particular situation?
Well, that is a great question, and it is a complex situation that we are dealing with when it comes to the attacks on our forces in Iraq and Syria. I think what's important for the American people to know is that these are Iran-backed militias that have been conducting attacks on U.S. forces that are there in Iraq and Syria for the sole mission to ensure the enduring defeat of ISIS. We don't want to see ISIS resurge to what it once was back 10 years ago. So that's why our forces are there in the region to protect and to ensure that ISIS never gains the strength that it once had. Again, we know that Iran continues to arm, equip, support, and train these militias, and they are the ones responsible for these attacks, and that's who we are going to hold accountable when we do respond.
What do you make of some Republicans on Capitol Hill tweeting out or sending out social media messages that say, target Tehran?
Look, again, I'm not going to get ahead of the president. I'm not going to get ahead of any decisions that have been made. What I can tell you is the groups that are conducting these attacks, we know have Iran behind them. They have the support of Iran. They are trained and equipped by Iran, but they are operating within Iraq and Syria. They are attacking our forces there, and of course, tragically in Jordan. So again, the president is going to take all necessary means that he feels to protect our forces, to protect American interests, but I'm not going to get ahead of what military action looks like.
As you make a decision as an administration, the president makes his final decision, what does it look like in terms of engagement with U.S. allies in determining what's best, not maybe just for the United States, but maybe for U.S. allies as well? Is this being discussed at length, the response, the possible response with allies, or is this more of a U.S.-only deliberation?
Well, you've seen our response with allies in Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen. We've conducted multilateral strikes with the UK and other countries that have provided support for those strikes, and you've seen us do it time and time again, and we're going to continue to do that. We value the support of our partners and allies in the region and all around the world. And the attacks that we're seeing on our forces in Iraq and Syria, those have coalition forces present at those military facilities. And so it is very important that and our partners and allies understand why we are taking the action that we are, whether it be unilateral or in some cases multilateral. And that's what you've seen us do in those Houthi-controlled areas in Yemen.
Tower 22, help us understand the defenses of Tower 22 and whether there could have been a better job done or what it tells us about U.S. vulnerability in places like Iraq and Syria.
Well, as you can appreciate, Central Command is looking into this right now, trying to figure out how a drone was able to evade U.S. air defenses. I'm not going to get ahead of their review. That's something that they're going to continue to evaluate. And make no mistake, they're going to take every measure and every precaution necessary to protect U.S. forces. And they're going to continue to do that. Whether that means changing anything, I'm not going to forecast that here. We certainly wouldn't want to tip our hand either way. But what I can tell you is that for the commander of Central Command, for the secretary, and of course for the president, the protection of U.S. forces is a priority, and we're going to keep that top of mind.
The administration has framed this attack as an escalation. Should the American people be bracing for more escalation from these forces in the coming weeks and months? Is this something that's just kind of a spot attack, or is this part of a mounting escalation on the horizon?
Well, I can't predict what these IRGC-backed groups will do, but what I can tell you is that we've seen a pattern of these attacks since October 17th. We've seen over 100 attacks on our forces, and whether it be in Iraq or Syria, and now, unfortunately, with the case earlier this week in Jordan. So we've continued to see these attacks, and the attack that we saw on January 28th was, in fact, an escalatory attack, as it did result tragically in the death of 3 of our service members. But again, I can't predict what these groups will do. We've continued to message very publicly, in fact, that we urge them to stop. They haven't, and our response is we are going to take action. We are going to hold them accountable, but we're going to do so at a time and place of our choosing.
What is the role of Congress in the coming weeks in helping the administration or working with the administration on determining a path forward, especially if it involves further military action?
Well, we regularly consult with Congress. They are, of course, notified of any actions that we are taking. And so Congress plays a vital role in that. And we value our partnership with whether it be members of the committees that we work with on a day-to-day basis or other members on the Hill. Of course, Congress plays a part in any role when it comes to U.S. forces and protection of our forces, whether it be Iraq or Syria or around the world.
Sabrina Singh at the Pentagon, thank you for stopping by. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Bob.
Florida has become a Republican stronghold, at least in some recent elections. So that's where President Biden had several campaign functions today. Coming up next, we'll look at his latest efforts in his re-election campaign. You're streaming America Decides.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
There is no more room in our city.
New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adults and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She's a country music legend, philanthropist, fashion icon, and now rock star.
I think there's a lot to be said about being comfortable with who you are.
Find out what's next for Dolly Parton when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She is a beloved American icon and head of a media empire. But is Oprah Winfrey happy? How do you define happiness?
Yeah, I call it happierness.
Find out when we go person to person.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
It was genocide, a deliberate effort by the United States government to eliminate the food source that was relied upon by Native American tribes.
American bison were slaughtered and Native Americans displaced.
And that's how tribes were subjugated to reservations and our lands were taken.
But now, through conservation efforts at Yellowstone,
Buffalo provided everything that we needed. Now they need help.
a herd grows
We need to step up and help them.
and a culture is reborn.
When the buffalo return and come back, that's when our tribe will begin to heal.
Yellowstone Bison Revival, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. President Biden was focused on his re-election campaign today in territory that has been at times friendly to former President Donald Trump. The president attended several fundraising events in Florida. CBS News chief White House correspondent, our friend Nancy Cordes, joins us now. Nancy, thanks for being here. So he went into the state run by Governor Ron DeSantis, the home of former President Donald Trump. Is he looking for a Democratic revival down south?
He's primarily looking for money, Robert, and there's a lot of it in Florida. So it's some place that presidential candidates of all stripes like to go on days like today. President Biden raising money at one fundraiser in Jupiter, Florida, north of West Palm Beach, and then heading down to Miami for another fundraiser this evening. No question, they'd love to try to recapture Florida. As you pointed out, it went for Donald Trump twice by about 4 points back in 2016, 2 points rather in 2016, 4 points in 2020. But before that, it did go for Barack Obama twice. So it's not out of the question, particularly because you've got abortion rights advocates in the state working to get a ballot measure there in November that might drive Democrats to the polls. That could help. But the reality is it is a tough uphill climb in Florida, particularly because, as you know, the Republican machine there is so dominant and they have really out-registered Democrats in that state this election cycle.
Nancy, how do you see this moment for the Biden campaign? Is it all about fundraising at this point and putting up advertising, or something else going on too behind the scenes?
Well, he's got a big event in Michigan, another upcoming primary state on Thursday. He is going to be campaigning there, a state that's gotten a little tougher for him because of the state's significant Arab American population, not very happy with the way that the U.S. has conducted itself in siding with Israel in the Israel-Hamas war. So he's got some ground to make up there. He did get a big boost the other day in the form of an endorsement from the UAW, a nice early endorsement that he had been fighting for months, if not years. So that is a notch in his favor in a big auto state like Michigan. But it's a combination, really, of fundraising and campaigning. The reality is he does not have much of a primary challenge to speak of. He is indubitably going to be the Democratic nominee, so he doesn't have to campaign hard in every primary state, but he does need to raise a lot of money to be competitive down the stretch in the general election, and so that's what he's focused on days like today.
That South Carolina Democratic primary is just in a few days. What's the White House and the Biden campaign's expectations about how that will go?
They feel good about it. Like I said, he doesn't have many challengers there. Of course, you've got folks like Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, but they, are not doing significantly well in the polls. The president was down there this weekend. He, of course, wants a great showing in South Carolina because he's the one who pushed for South Carolina to be the first in the nation primary for Democrats, bucking decades of tradition by saying that South Carolina should go first before Iowa, before New Hampshire, because it is a state that is more diverse and that he felt, the DNC felt, more representative of the Democratic Party. And so he showed them some love this weekend. He went down to South Carolina, but he's not going down there this week, which is a sign of how comfortable the Biden campaign feels about that particular state.
What about the other person on the ticket, Vice President Kamala Harris? What's her schedule look like, her priorities politically in the next few weeks?
She's doing a lot of campaigning as well, and she is really hitting that women's health issue hard. She is a more natural campaigner on that issue than President Biden is, frankly. This is an issue that he has had an evolution on, if you will, now firmly in favor of abortion rights. But Kamala Harris has been pretty outspoken on that issue. And she is someone the White House has found that they can send from state to state to state talking about something that they know will be a major issue, could be a very important issue for their voters in terms of just getting them enthusiastic, getting them excited down the stretch. You've seen all those polls, Robert, that show that the Biden campaign is dealing with a bit of slack when it comes to enthusiasm from their voters this time around. And they believe that that is the kind of issue that can get voters fired up. That's why they're hoping that there will be ballot measures in as many states as possible come November that might draw Democrats out to the polls, even if they're not particularly excited about another 4 years of Joe Biden.
And quickly, Nancy, you mentioned he's going to be in Michigan on Thursday, President Biden, with the UAW. He was just with the UAW a few days ago in Washington. So is this about just underscoring that support as much as possible?
Sure, because it pays dividends beyond Michigan in other battleground states. Wisconsin, for example, another big battleground state with a significant auto worker population. If he appears in Michigan, they're standing there with the auto workers talking about his support for the working class. That's something that they believe could resonate throughout the Rust Belt.
Nancy Cordes, thank you, as ever. That does it for us today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
Original documentary from CBS reports tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely. As